Well, looking forward to the program today. We've had a good week up till now. Of course, we're looking forward to the NCAA tournament starting today. We'll be watching John Sherman and I approximately 63 basketball games in the next few weeks, and we'll be following that closely. Our first guest this morning will be State Representative Ed Kraweicki of Bristol. He is the Republican. He is the minority leader of the State House of Representatives, and he'll be with us in just a moment and talking to me up till about 9:30 today, suggesting a topic for the second part of the program, and I hope that you'll get in on this with me. I would like to talk about the whole situation with the water treatment plant in Putnam and the meeting last evening of the selectmen and the Water Pollution Control Authority and the town attorney and Mr. Ryman, the boss at the Water and Sewer Department, and about the whole idea of executive sessions and the public's right to know what's going on in their local government and freedom of information and all those issues that can be talked about, I think, in the context of this particular situation with the difficulties with the new water treatment plant down in Harrisville and Woodstock. But first we're going to talk to Representative Ed Kraweicki. Ed, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here, Ham. How are you?
Good morning. How are you?
It's great to be out in your part of the state this
Well,
morning.
you're talking to the talk giant of northeastern Connecticut, WINY.
I want you to know something. I would love to listen to the next 63 basketball games or whatever the number was you just gave. That sounds like a lot of fun.
Well, you get into show business at this level, you know.
Okay.
You do 1 hour in the morning, and then you go home and watch basketball games.
Jeez, what a great deal.
It's great. Ed, you're an attorney.
Yes, I am.
And when they answered the phone the other day when I phoned you, they asked me if I wanted junior or senior, and I estimated that probably your son, if you had one, is probably too young to be working there at the law office.
I think you're probably right. Yeah, I practice law in a 5-person office out here. My dad was the original starter of the firm, and he's sort of taking retirement, but most people still refer to me as Ed and don't know my nickname as being Ted, so I have to live the rest of my life with this junior-senior drill.
How is Dad handling this ego-wise, as far as you're being the minority leader of the state assembly? You know, his son and namesake, is he handling it well?
Oh, sure. He does a pretty good job. Actually, we went through this exercise when I first was elected because people suddenly started saying, when I first ran, it was, Ed Kraweicki Jr. is son of Bristol attorney, former corp counsel, former state representative Ed Kraweicki. My dad served there one term back in the 50s. And then right after the election finished, the conversation went to something along the lines of, gee, this is Ed Kraweicki Sr., son of State Representative Ed Kraweicki. So the poor guy has had to live with me now more than I think he ever anticipated in his life. But he handles it pretty well.
You've been in the state legislature for how many terms now, Ed?
This is the beginning of my 7th term, and I've done just about everything in that General Assembly on virtually every committee since I've been there, and I've served as a ranking member, for example, at the Judiciary Committee. I've been an assistant leader for a term or two. I was the deputy majority leader when we were in the majority back in 85 and 86. I've been the deputy minority leader for a couple of terms, and now with Bob Jekyll moving on to run on the state ticket during the last election cycle, I sought the Republican floor leader position, whether we were going to be in the majority or the minority, and as things turned out, it ended up being the minority leader.
Did you have to compete with anybody else? Was there an election, or were you contested for the minority leader position?
No, I guess I did a okay job of campaigning early on, and had solicited enough support and collected the requisite number of votes before the process, so on the day that the election actually took place, I was not opposed.
I know Mr. Jekyll was very highly respected. He ran for lieutenant governor on the Roland ticket and lost, and so what's his future?
Well, Bobby, I've always treated and felt was one of the brightest legislators either side of the political aisle had to offer. And I think most people who have ever come in touch with him understand that he was just that. So we had an opening in our legislative commissioner's office, which is the oversight panel that we have in the legislature who actually looks at each and every bill for constitutional correctness and for grammar and that sort of thing. I asked Bob if he wanted that job. He took it. I've appointed him to the Law Revision Commission, which is a specialty group of individuals who examine major and very detailed questions of law during the course of the cycle when the legislature's in session. And the third thing that I've been doing for Bob is appearances that I can't make. I've been sort of asking him whether he'd like to make those appearances. I happen to think Bob Jaco will be back 3 years from now or 4 years from now running for some high statewide office, and I think the state of Connecticut would be very well served by him.
Yeah. You represent Bristol and Plymouth. I think what our listeners mainly want to know, we're going to get to budget and tax issues in a moment, but I think they mostly want to know about Bristol, whether they really do sit around in the barbershops in Bristol talking about their Stanley tape measures and their planes.
Well, I think you mean New Britain on that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but I'll tell you what
you're
we
right close by, right?
That's the next town over,
Yeah.
and I will tell you, Bristol and Plymouth and New Britain, notwithstanding that they are large cities in the state of Connecticut, have a very small town atmosphere.
Yeah.
The people in Bristol know each other. It's a closely knit community and one that we feel very intertwined with each other. So the answer is yes, they do actually talk about the internal workings of the business community. You'll note that we have ESPN, for example, here in Bristol, and we've got the Ogden Martin Trash to Energy facility. I was listening to the news as I was waiting to come on the air, and I heard what you're going to have on for your second half of the show, and I said, gee, that's along the same lines that we went through a number of years ago about those kinds of facilities. So people do sit around in our community talking about those kinds of things.
Yeah. The big issue, of course, that you've been quoted on our air here, and we've are following in the papers, is the whole situation with the regional economy, the Connecticut economy, the governor and the legislature's efforts to come to terms with deficits in the current fiscal year and to come up with a budget and tax plan for next year. We had Governor Weicker on live in this studio as a candidate for governor, and he said that he was opposed to a state income tax and that it would be like throwing gasoline on a burning fire. And Dave Kym, our news director, and I questioned him hard on that, and he stuck to it. And we didn't believe him, and we were polite journalists, and we moved on. I suspect that you and others in the state legislature probably weren't surprised either. But it seems like that was part of a dance that people in politics seem to think has to go on to arrive at a plan, and it seems to me that the dance is continuing. Liberal members of the Senate and House in our General Assembly are still talking about a state income tax as though it's a possibility, and as though that they're unconvinced and that they're not sure, and that there's a great amount of debate has to take place, and yet it seems as though it's time for some decisive leadership and for decisions to be made fairly quickly, because of the confidence that would give the people of Connecticut. It seems like it's almost a crisis situation where what we do is not so important, is that we do it decisively and begin to get our house in order. How are the Republicans under your leadership? I don't presume that you can control everybody or that you should, but how are the Republicans approaching this in a general way?
Well, that's a long question. Maybe I'll give you a long answer.
Fine.
We have analyzed the situation this way, Ham. We don't believe that an income tax is right for the state of Connecticut. I certainly don't believe that any tax increase is right for the state of Connecticut until such time as our governmental leaders come to grips with the real problem, and that is that spending in this state is out of control. We have been spending money at greater percentage rates than any other state in the union for the past decade. The governor has put a plan on the table that calls for an income tax, calls for a very broad sales tax, calls for raising revenue about $900 million, and basically has increased the budget by about $1 billion, notwithstanding that he'd like to peddle the story that he's reduced spending and all these other things. Any reductions in, the term cuts that the governor is using are really just reductions in the requested or the wish list of the various department heads and commissioners of the state of Connecticut. So we have a major problem on our hands.
Let's pin that down first before we go on. You're saying that that the cuts he proposes are not cuts in the 1990 existing budget levels?
The bottom line is actually the expenditure level is actually higher than it was last year. The governor has proposed state expenditures of $7.5 billion, give or take a little bit, and those numbers are higher than they were last year. Now, let me be very specific before you get a whole bunch of callers calling and saying, Kraweicki doesn't know what he's talking about. The governor has, in fact, said, all right, I want to eliminate this program, but I'm going to fund that program. So when I talk about there aren't any reductions, I'm talking about the bottom line on the state budget. It has increased, as it has every year since I was first elected. And just so that the listening audience can understand what I'm talking about, in 1979, when I first came to the legislature, the state of Connecticut budget, the complete budget, was $1.9 billion. Today we are talking about a budget that will be in excess of $7.7 billion. I don't care which cost of living escalator you choose to use, no one's personal income has risen by that kind of percentage, and nowhere is anyone going to argue that that kind of growth is in any way, shape, or form commensurate with inflation rates or the growth in personal income and the like.
The $7.7 billion, is that the 1990 budget or the proposed?
This is the proposed budget that the governor has on the table.
Okay, do we call that 91, 92, or do we just call it 91?
No, that's 91, 92. It runs from July 1 of 91 until June 30 of 92.
July to June.
Yeah, and the other problem that we've got at this point is that the governor has chosen to look at the grant program within the state budget. We really have two kinds of budgets here. We have an operating expenditure part of the budget, and we have a grant program. I mean, the grant program means that those monies go to municipalities for different things and the like. The reason why you're hearing municipalities crying is that the grant programs is what the governor went to and made reductions in. That was, frankly, the easy way to do business. The operating expenditure side, where the people are, how many state employees we have, those kinds of things, the governor chose not to deal with that part of the budget when he put his package together. And that's, I think, the reason why we're now revisiting the issue of the $400 million in give-backs from the state employees and the possibility of layoffs as the governor is arguing those points. So it's a very complex problem, but the long and the short of it is we are now in a battle over what the actual budget of the state of Connecticut will look like and whether we are going to put into place limitations on spending long term. The question in Connecticut is not whether or not we can raise revenue, because we are a very wealthy state. We can raise tremendous amounts of money. The question is, when will we implement meaningful spending reforms so that we can rein in government spending? Things like constitutional limit on spending, things like a biennial budget, things like a nonpartisan revenue forecasting board, things like a cap on the bonding programs of the state of Connecticut, things like a opening up of the prevailing wage legislation, things like binding arbitration. The list goes on, and we have a unique and historic opportunity, in my opinion, this year to put those meaningful spending reforms in place, to then look at the budget of the state of Connecticut, try to do it without an income tax, and get us through the economic crises that we have at this point.
I'm wondering, Ed, whether it's Isham Martin talking to State Representative Ed Kraweicki of Bristol about state budget and finances and taxes. I'm wondering if, with now sort of three different political entities to deal with, whether with a independent governor and a Democrat majority in both houses of the legislature, and really a pretty strong Republican minority that actually did better than the Democrats in the gubernatorial election and let's see, Pauline Keiser won Secretary of State. Actually, it was a pretty good Republican years in many ways. I'm wondering, is the press has the responsibility now of getting three different political entities' points of view out to the public about budget and taxes? See, I don't even know whether you have proposed this laundry list, whether the Republicans are advancing this laundry list of solutions that you've got, and whether they're being taken seriously and are being given a fair shake in the legislature. Have you, do you have different Republican members that are proposing these different things, and are they getting fair play in the media?
Let me put it to you this way, Ham. We are actually working very diligently on an alternative budget for the state of Connecticut, one that does not include an income tax, one that does incorporate all of those spending reforms that I just gave you the laundry list on, and one that we believe will ultimately be adopted in a bipartisan fashion. Let me be very specific about one thing. The game has changed with an independent governor. The largest philosophical block of people in the Connecticut legislature are Republicans. We have 63 members in the House and 16 in the Senate. That's 63 out of 151, and that's 16 out of 36. What we are in the driver's seat on is going to our more conservative friends on the other side of the political aisle, the Democratic side of the aisle, and saying, for once, we have an opportunity to put together a bipartisan budget, one that puts these spending reforms into place, one that reins in government spending, one that does not implement a personal income tax on the people of the state of Connecticut, and one that does not declare war on the middle-income people of the state, specifically people who earn between $30,000 and $70,000. I believe very strongly that when push comes to shove, we will make the budget for the coming legislative cycle, and the governor's feet will be in the fire because he's going to have to make a fundamental business decision on whether or not he will veto a budget that does not include an income tax. The governor has been sounding more and more dug in, sort of like guys in the military who aren't going to back down at all, in that he will not accept anything that doesn't look very much like his own package. He has said on the air, maybe on your show even, I don't know, that he rejects limitations on spending because he doesn't think that's the proper way to go. I will just tell you emphatically, after 13 years of living in that General Assembly, that if we don't mandatorily put limitations on legislators, the problem will get worse. The issue, in addition, is that...
See, I believe you. When I ran for the legislature many years ago, and it's when I first met you and Pauline, they said that you were one of the bright lights, and maybe you were. I didn't rule out a state income tax, and it's been a lot of years, and in those intervening years, I've come to the conclusion that the legislature and politicians generally are really incapable of controlling the spending on their own, and that state income tax is just a new spigot of money that's so attractive and so easy to ratchet up the rate of an income tax that it just opens up a new source of revenue that just would allow spending to go unchecked.
You've articulated my point of view. This is just a new pocket of money. The Yankee Institute for Public Policy Studies in the state of Connecticut recently completed a study on income taxes in the last 8 states that have implemented income taxes, and surprisingly they found that with an income tax, spending didn't come under control. It actually escalated, and the problem became more aggravated. What they also found, and this is a significant issue, for every dollar raised with a personal income tax, the personal income growth, in other words, every listener out there today, their personal income growth reduced by $5. So the correlation was 1 to 5. What it did was it destroys the willingness of people to go out and invest their money and to put it back into the economy of the state of Connecticut and the states that were at play. So, we have some very deep-seated fiscal issues at play. And one other thing, most economists around this country agree that it is going to be the consumer that is going to bring us out of the recession that we find ourselves in.
Right.
The worst thing that you can do, and it is like pouring gasoline on a fire, is to add a personal income tax where you remove the ability of the individual consumer to make legitimate decisions on what kind of product they're going to purchase and when they're going to purchase it. I'll give you a specific example. If you had a single mother of two who earns $32,500 a year at, let's say, Hartford Hospital or someplace, that individual is going to have a $12,500 exemption. They have a $20,000 exposed income to this income tax that the governor has recommended. That means that person is going to pay an extra $1,200 a year in personal income tax and is going to pay a sales tax on all the things that we used to pay it on and the things that the governor has expanded it to. If you compare the new tax package to the old one, which is really the only comparison you can actually do, at $1,200 a year, that's $100 a month. That means that person, that mother, had to have been purchasing under the old sales tax about $1,200 a month in sales taxable items in order to equal the amount of money that the governor wants to take out of her pocket. The person didn't earn enough money to do that. It doesn't work. It is middle-income people in this state who are going to get clobbered, and, in essence, war has been declared on the working men and women, and I think that is the fundamental issue. The question isn't how do we raise revenue. The question is how do we bring spending under control.
Getting back to who is the largest philosophical bloc in the state legislature,
Mm-hmm.
are there enough O'Neill Democrats, people that shared Governor O'Neill's objection to an income tax, to join with Republicans to be the majority that's going to prevail on this thing in the end? Because I've been operating from the assumption that there were enough moderate and liberal Republicans and other Democrats that beholden to some of the social service and education constituencies, that probably would be the majority that would prevail.
Well, let me answer you this way. There is a caucus within the Democratic ranks in the House of Representatives called the Moderate Caucus. It's made up of some 40 members. They are working on an alternative budget proposal that parallels the lines that the Republicans are working on. We felt that it was appropriate for both groups to continue working these parallel lines for another 2 or 3 weeks, and then what should begin to happen at that point is the interchange between the two groups.
Mm-hmm.
If there are, in fact, 40 members, I can just say this to you. I have 63 House members in the House of Representatives. We have taken, generally speaking, a straw poll of the members. They have indicated a unwillingness to support an income tax. That is not to say that we are lockstep in opposition to an income tax. I suspect that I probably have a few members who would like to go in that direction. But they have also indicated that you give me an alternative, and I will probably support that alternative. So the answer to your question is I think there are probably a potential 100 votes out there right now between Republicans and those moderate Democrats looking for an alternative to an income tax in the House of Representatives.
And how many members are there in the House?
There's 151. So there's about a 2-to-1 margin who would prefer not to do an income tax. Now, will we get to that point? I don't know. All I know is that I need 76 votes in the House to pass a budget and a tax package. It is my hope, my fervent hope, that I can work with so-called O'Neill Democrats to put together an alternative budget. And even if 50 Republicans come to the table and 26 out of the 88 Democrats come to the table with an alternative, we have just changed the budget and tax package for the state. So I think the possibility is very good that we'll do that.
Let me ask you a political question.
What were all these other ones?
Governor Weicker, is he completely engaged in this business of being governor? I have a high regard for Mr. Sebas, who we met during the gubernatorial campaign. Is the governor of an attitude and temperament that he's going to stay engaged in this process and will be able to handle compromise and setbacks? What is your reading of the performance of the governor so far?
Well, I guess I'm disappointed in the governor at this point, having put the income tax on the table. I don't buy the rhetoric that he's peddling, that he had no choice and that he had only this one option to deal with. I really think that Bill Sebas didn't produce all of the options for the governor to make a complete decision. So in that respect, I'm disappointed. That having been said, let me tell you, Lowell Weicker is one very good politician. On the stump, he can make you probably believe that jumping out of a fourth-story window is good for your health. And with that understanding, I believe many of us in the General Assembly must go out very hard and fast and begin to provide the alternative points of view to what the governor has put on the table.
Are the Republicans doing that? You're here on the show with me.
Yeah, we're doing it.
Are you going to get these alternatives out in a time frame so that the media and that the public will perceive that the Republicans were responsible in offering alternatives and not just sitting back letting Weicker take the punishment?
No, I've been everywhere I go and everywhere I can, I've been asking to speak to organizations, groups, media groupings, and whatnot. The answer is yes. We're out there doing as much as we can in that regard. It certainly is much more difficult for one member of 187 legislators to get the same kind of equal time that the governor gets.
Yeah.
I mean, he's by himself.
Yeah.
Our timetable is that by the first week of April, we will have our alternative budget in a preliminary draft stage. Our goal is by the second or third week of April to have a final package ready for dissemination to the state of Connecticut. I will be the first to tell you that whatever that plan is, there are going to be people who aren't going to like it. The question will really come down to, will they like our plan better than they like the governor's plan or any other plan that comes out between now and then?
See, I think most people don't like an economy in the state and in New England that's going nowhere, and I think that political leadership is part of what's going to lead us out of it. I think they're doing a pretty good job in Massachusetts with a new Republican governor there of facing up to the problems, and we look for that here too. Eddie, you've done a great job giving us a lot of information.
Well, thank you, Ham. I appreciate
really
it.
enjoy talking with you.
I'd love to come back sometime if you'd like, and I'll be happy to do it anytime.
Okay.
Okay.
Bye-bye. Have a good
Bye-bye.
day.
You too.
Isham Martin on the WINY Talk Show. We've been talking with State Representative Ed Kraweicki, who was the Republican minority leader in the General Assembly. He says he'd need 76 votes for a Republican, more conservative tax and spending plan to prevail. There are 63 Republican House members, and he thinks that there are enough O'Neill Democrats, conservatives, opposed to state income tax. And he predicts that plan is the one that will eventually prevail. We'll see. It'll be interesting to follow. We'll be back. We're back. Isham Martin on the talk show. Let's go to the phones. Good morning. You're on the air.
Yeah, good morning.
Hi.
I like the way these politicians represent their ideas by taking not a widow, a divorcee perhaps, that's a single head of the household, with two children, and that makes between $30,000 and $35,000 a year, and it will take $100 a month out of her monthly wages in order to make things work. Well, I've got some statistics here. I mean, how about the elderly that has to pay out $2,266.96 a year for two people on a $10,000 income? They're taking out $188.91 a month from these people, and maybe that lady with the two children, they don't tell the benefits that they have, because every employer has insurance on their employees. Mm-hmm. Now that's a big part of it. Yeah. There's $3,000 and $4,000 and $5,000 that they don't say. That's. But I see the difference since my husband has been retired. I mean, I had more money to play with when he was working full time. Yeah. And now Medicare, Isham, is $28.60 per person, and by the year 1991, it's going to go up to $45 each. Now, and they only raise it substantially, not substantially, 5.4 this year. And I know that you know what the argument will be, that Social Security wasn't supposed to be your only source of income. No, that is very true, but everybody wasn't making $30,000 and $40,000 a year when they were about 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. You know. So then we also pay $1,000 in homeowners and car insurance. How elderly people survive? I don't know. And I hope they don't cut too many social programs,
Mm-hmm.
you know? All right, so maybe somebody else might have some different ideas.
How did you feel about Mr. Kraweicki generally and his assessment of the whole state situation and budget and taxes? I was impressed with his presentation. I thought he seemed like he had a lot of facts.
Oh, they have a lot of facts.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Sure, they all have a lot of facts, but every time I hear them say that the average homeowner or the earner has $30,000 to $35,000 a year,
mm-hmm.
and this is only for one person,
Yeah.
I don't know of too many people, unless they're a professional person, that makes that kind of money.
No, well, probably there's people in the more urban areas. Did he say his typical person worked at a hospital? Maybe,
no, I didn't.
Maybe
I
as a
didn't get
nurse.
that part. Maybe she did.
The thing is, your property taxes on your house might be higher in those areas, and that was a single head of household,
right.
who probably is putting kids in daycare and has a big expense at that. And of course, when you're making the $30-some thousand, you're paying more federal income tax than you and your husband are as retired people with your small income.
But look how much less we're getting. I mean, $20,000 a year less that's coming into a home.
Yeah.
I mean, hey, I could live like a queen.
Well, that's a lot more money than I make, but I would say that it is possible that person may be strapped also.
Yeah, but are they all single heads of household?
Well, we
there
hope
must
not.
Be two people somewhere, you know. All right.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.
Good morning, you're on the air.
Yes, good morning.
Hi.
I'm hoping that people are really listening out there, because I thought that this person did a very good presentation. He expressed my sentiments completely. Having an income tax does not make the state solvent. You can prove that by the state of Massachusetts.
Right.
And
well, just to restate the figures that Representative Kraweicki gave us, in 1979, the budget of the state of Connecticut was $1.9 billion.
Right.
The governor's proposed budget is $7.7 billion.
Right, and I also read somewhere, I can't remember where, because I do a lot of reading, I like to read, but I did read that he did not cut anything out of the budget, like this Mr. whatever his name is stated, that it was just the fact that he thought he should cut out of the 1991-1992 budget. There was no reduction at all in the expenditures from the 1990 budget.
Right.
And I think that having an income tax would only give them more money to spend. And I don't know if everyone got a questionnaire from Mr. Karen, our legislator, but I think that it's very well worth answering, because he's got some very good questions, and I think he's kind of looking to the general public.
Yeah, and he's leaning toward an income tax, I believe.
He is leaning
so
toward
people should respond.
Tax. Exactly. People should respond. It only took about 10 minutes to answer his questions, and I think you had to put a stamp on it. I can't remember. But I think it's well worth the 29 cents to give him an idea of how you feel about this.
Well,
I think it's very important.
Well, he's a person, he's a politician with his ear to the ground, that young man,
Mm-hmm.
and I would say that that's being a good citizen, filling that thing out, and that he will pay attention to it.
I agree with that. And I think that when the Republicans were in the Capitol building, I think it was maybe 5 or 6 years ago, they had a rainy day fund and everything going, and they didn't have an income tax, and the Democrats spent all that money, plus they put us in debt $2 billion. So I think something's wrong there somewhere.
Okay.
I think we've got to cut back on all our programs, even the social programs. We ought to come back on everything, 5% from last year anyway.
I think it's time to dig in and endure without some programs for a while at all levels, and dig in, and because if we don't dig in and put the skids on spending now when the revenues are way off, who has any confidence that we're ever going to?
Well, that's the thing.
Okay, got to move along.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Good call. Thank you very much for calling. Isham Martin on the talk show. Right now, let's check Bob Harris's forecast brought to us by Safeway Petroleum.
Good morning.
It's 39 degrees in Putnam by the Cargill Falls. We've got telephone calls coming in, and we'll be right to them. Isham Martin back I just realized that I owe an apology to the listeners. Yesterday I asked people what I should ask Mr. Kraweicki. I got one suggestion from a caller that raised the question of whether state employees were being asked to unfairly shoulder the burden of the budget deficit, and I had it all written down this morning, and I neglected to ask Mr. Kraweicki the question. I got carried away, and we ran out of time, and I didn't ask the question, and I apologize. It should have been at the top of my list. I'll try and do better in the future. We've got another phone call. Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Martin.
Hi, how are you?
Fine. I couldn't agree with Mr. Kraweicki more that a new source of revenue without constitutional caps will only equate to someone out there in the audience handing their checkbook to someone to fill in the numbers. It's obvious that when you provide the opportunity to draw from a larger source of revenues, our track record in this state is going to be impacted by it, and it's just going to grow. I have one more thought, if I may. The fact of a report, Chambers, reported that the fact that over expenditures had occurred in the Kelp Defense Fund. A year and a half ago, approximately, I was involved in a petition effort that produced ample numbers of signatures to put on a referendum ballot the public's position with regard to expenditures with regard to this effort.
Yeah.
No way would I be opposed to using monies for technical applications, but frivolous suits with regard to appeals that just waste taxpayers' money is something that I do object to. Mm-hmm. And the fact is, we have gone again and overspent the allocated, authorized monies for this fiscal year. Mm-hmm. And the group that presented itself at the town council meeting was an orchestrated group. It's quite clear that certain people are being given confidential information beyond the general public, and the effort is being made to present the picture that there is great support for the idea of unlimited expenditures with regard to the Kelp Defense Fund. Mm-hmm. That is apparently, quite obvious to me, a lesson that was not learned the last time, and it's quite clear that the machinations of the majority council members in thwarting putting this type of issue on a referendum ballot was undertaken. And it's too bad. And what this comes down to in my mind is...
We're going to have to wrap this up, all right? We're going to have to do a whole Kelp program soon because, you know, the Kelp, the partnership people, Mr. Boss, has notified the local towns that they are going to increase the volume of stuff that they want to burn there on a daily basis, which seems to change the application, and there's a great deal that we need to talk about on this subject. So we're going to have to wrap this up for today. You can make a final remark.
If you will, one final remark.
Yeah.
Honesty and integrity in politicians is an issue you've raised. I raised the issue once again.
Yeah.
There is a cause and a case to be made for honesty and integrity, and I think the present climate just reflects there's a need for improved honesty and integrity within some of our officials.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye. Isham Martin on the talk show. We'll be right back.
The Bradley Playhouse.
To live longer with seafood from Austin's, of course.
Good morning.
Good morning. Some politicians in Hartford are saying that the sales tax will have to be expanded on items that are not presently covered by the sales tax. I can see their handwriting on the wall. Every time we go to the First National A&P for our weekly food shopping, we will have to pay a sales tax on all food. Mm-hmm. And you imagine how much revenue that would bring in the state of Connecticut? It's all food purchases with tax.
Yeah. Well, it would, except it's a lot harder to bring more revenue in with that than with an income tax, isn't it?
Well, yeah, but that would be even if they have the sales tax. I mean, if they have an income tax, they will put that tax on the food.
Yeah, they're talking about putting a tax on fuel oil also.
Yeah.
And a lot of other things. The bottom line is that we're in a terrible mess.
I know, and but they're so overwhelmed over there. They don't know which direction to go.
No, they don't.
That's not just in Connecticut. It's all over Rhode Island, Massachusetts.
Oh, it's all over.
Even the United States of America.
But
Washington.
I heard some commentator say something that I wish that I'd said. When some politician was saying, yeah, but it's not our fault. The problems exist in New York and New Jersey and Massachusetts and Connecticut. It's not just us here in Connecticut, or it's not just us here in Massachusetts. And the commentator said, well, is it possible that you all screwed up, that you all overspent during good times, and that you all could have anticipated that this was coming and should have been putting money away for a rainy day and should have known that the boom times weren't going to go on forever? And I think that's really what happened. Because politicians are the same every place.
Oh, yeah, but they say that to justify their own fault.
Yeah. Yeah.
If guys in Boston, Massachusetts, Rhode Island want to jump off a cliff, the politicians in Connecticut have to do the same thing? Of course not.
I got another call. I'm going to move along. Thanks a lot for calling. Good morning.
Good morning, Asher.
Got you in on the tail end here.
That's good, all right. Good morning, Asher. This is Roxanne Pappas.
Yes, Roxanne.
And I'm calling.
Yeah, you're a counselor in the town of Killingly.
Right.
Right.
And I'm the chairperson.
Speak up just a little, please, Roxanne.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes. I'm calling in reference to the letter that the Killingly subcommittee received from the applicant on March 5th.
Louder if you can, Roxanne.
Can you hear now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hold it up there.
Okay. I have to really shout. I'm calling in reference to the letter that we received on March 5th reflecting the changes that KELP's application of November 13th.
What's the gist of it? We've only got a minute.
Okay. What I just want to make a statement that there's been significant and major changes in this burner, and this is not the same burner the Siting Council had held hearings on.
It's different hardware even.
The design of the plant has changed significantly.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? I feel that the public has a right to know what effect this new burner will have on our environment. In addition, KELP has been making many changes in the burner since the Siting Council's hearings and approval.
Mm-hmm.
And I just feel that the public has a right to know, and the Siting Council should require KELP to file a new application.
Well, I'll be in touch with you. We're out of time, but we're going to need more information, and we'll try and do a good job here on the talk show and getting some of this information out.
Fine.
Okay.
Fine, we'll talk
Have a good day.
Okay, bye-bye.
Roxanne Pappas, counselor in Killingly, calling in. We're out of time. WINY in Putnam. It's 10 o'clock. You were starting to go down, what some of the other neat things are that are going to be auctioned off that evening. We've only got a couple minutes.
I'd like Nancy to talk about our landscape design package, because she's of the two of us, is our expert in that area. We have a great package.
Maureen Nicholson of Pomfret is a landscape architect, and most people, including myself until very recently, didn't really understand the difference between a designer and an architect. But that means she has a master's degree.
That's why your place is just such a hodgepodge.
Oh, quiet. But she has a master's degree from an accredited landscape architecture program, and that's a hard degree to get, and there are only a few schools in the country that offer it. And she has donated for a private home or a small business a landscaping scheme, which means design, I should say, not scheme. But the person that purchases this, or the business that purchases it, will have her come to their place and work on and design and give them on paper how to make their place look beautiful. And then in addition to that, Nancy Rao who works in the garden sales business, has been accumulating tools and shrubbery and donations of a variety of kinds. And my stepson, Brad Painter, is going to help do some installation of the work when it's designed. And we're putting together a very nice package. And so an individual homeowner might be interested in this. If you've always thought, what should I do here? Where should I place things in my yard? What can I do to make this private or attractive to customers or whatever?
They don't bring sod in with that, do they?
We may this year. We may have sod. If our saint Mr. DeRocher calls, we really will have sod.
By the way,
or at least topsoil.
Man Around the House, which is a business name, Man Around the House in the Wyndham area, has called in as contributing to you 1 hour of free services from Man. We're almost out of the time.
Dan Borky.
Oh, that's great.
Yes, that's great.
We got about 40 seconds. Tick off a couple more, Jane, and we're going to be out of here. And the thing is, on Saturday, April 27th at 6:30, they ought to call United Services in Dayville, 774-2020 for tickets. What else, Jane, have we got out while we play the traveling music?
We have 2 bicycles, a Pennzoil Kid car from Jack Larson in Eastford,